Parents are outraged after a hospital group asked them whether their newborn babies identified as transgender. Inspira Health said it had to ask to comply with new laws. It gave parents the option to identify their babies as trans woman, trans man, gender queer, or even neither male nor female. The local Republican senator thought the form was fake when enraged parents sent her the form.
In fact, when I saw it, I thought maybe it was something made up to be provocative. So I had my staff reach out directly to the health network to confirm that it was indeed real, because you looked at it and you go, there's no way. Like, it's so stupid. It has absolutely no efficacy in the medical world. And how are they providing this to parents of newborn patients?
I mean, this is a statement when it's absolutely absurd. I mean, sexualizing a newborn child, asking how they identify. But this is a statement from the New Jersey Department of Health spokesperson saying that the department stresses any collection of sexual orientation, gender identity data. It should be done in a clinically appropriate and culturally competent manner, including patient populations for which certain data may not be appropriate, as in the case for newborns. Now, then they recommended that hospitals develop internal policies and procedures based on clinical advice to assist their employees in collecting such data. Are they trying to walk back now what they're having mothers fill out for their newborn babies? I mean, what does this statement tell you about their reaction?
I think once again, and it's kind of like, as Van Jones said, Democrats have realized that they've gone too far. The entire legislature, as well as the governor, is up this year in New Jersey. And I think you're starting to see, once the public expresses outrage, a walking back of some of the more insane policies that have been implemented under this administration and under Democratic control in the state.
Donald Trump's return to the White House was hailed as the end of woke. He declared the end of transgender ideology.
We will teach our children to love our country, to honor our history, and to always respect our great American flag. And we will get critical race theory and transgender insanity the hell out of our schools. And always remember, this is so easy, this will be done tomorrow. We will keep men out of women's sports. It's over. In a few moments, I'll sign a historic executive order to ban men from competing in women's sports. It's about time. My administration will not stand by and watch men beat and batter female athletes. From now on, women's sports will be only for women. In recent years, the radical left has waged an all-out campaign to erase the very concept of biological sex and replace it with a militant transgender ideology.
Yet many medical professionals are resolute that children can be transgender.
The youngest that I've ever heard somebody express their gender identity being different than their assigned gender is 18 months old. We have the largest trans youth clinic in the world.
People took to X to share their concerns. One stated, "We've been told for years by the left that individuals don't pick their gender or sexual orientation. They are born that way. But then we've got parents in New Jersey making that choice for their babies before they can even walk, talk, or eat solid foods. Which one is it?" Another simply wrote, "What a bunch of utter clowns." Photographer David Bailey's son, Sasha, stressed, however, how vulnerable many young people can be to the idea of transitioning.
I think one of the major issues that we're facing is that people are pushed down this route far too quickly without looking at the external factors. So we have a major problem with we look at this thing as from the aesthetic angle. We look at this as, this is what you want to be, this is why you want to be on the outside. You want to change yourself, almost like you want to fit into a round peg into a square hole. You want to be something to solve the problem that's around you from your environment. So you may be in an environment that's very bad for you. You may be, like I was, in an environment where it's abusive. And in order to solve that, you need to be able to change yourself.
Okay, and do you think then that this is a potentially very big problem in society? I mean, why do you think that this is affecting a lot of men at the moment?
I think this is only going to grow, and I think the situation I was in where, I had my masculinity challenged on a daily basis is something that we see kind of growing in society in general for men. The problem, I think, is that men, especially young men right now, growing up, they're told as a basis, especially if you're Western, that you are evil, you are wrong as growing up. You have something wrong with you. All of our thinkers, all of the people who think as men are vilified. You just have to look at what happened to Jordan Peterson. And as that's a problem that grows, I think that, I can either be, a cis white male, or I can baptize myself in this kind of cult of gender ideology, and I can get a new label, or I can become something different. And that gives me the opportunity to cast off all of the sins of my father, all of the sins of the generations before, and fit into this society in a way that's new and fresh. And I think that this is something that's only going to grow. I think it's only going to grow massively as we kind of continue to vilify, masculinity in all its forms.
Mm. And presumably there was a period of time where you thought that making that transition would have solved everything and made you very happy.
Yeah.
What, in reality, do you think that would have done, a couple of years down the line? I
think a couple of years down the line, we would be sitting here and I'd be a person who had detransitioned. I would have lost my fertility. I would have lost so many things that would have made me a man. And we'd be sitting here having a very different conversation about regret. We'd be sitting here having a conversation about how all of these things were taken away from me, how the doctors didn't tell me, weren't honest with me about what had happened, weren't honest with me about the loss that I would have encountered. These things that we're talking about, we hand them over in society so often to those with kind of the lowest morals. We hand over the only way to speak about this stuff without being cancelled, without having everything taken away from you, is to be someone who exists outside the paradigm of, a standard job, outside the paradigm of all of that stuff. I mean, I'm sitting here as a person who is very lucky in a sense that I can speak about this stuff because I've had everything ripped away from me. I have nothing to lose. So I think it's so important that more and more people do stand up and talk about this. More and more people do provide these kind of incentive structures for people to be able to see a way of improving oneself as a man. Whereas the only ways that we're being offered to do that right now is either, joining this cult, changing everything about yourself, or joining another kind of paradigm which is all about extreme levels of toxic masculinity to almost caricature levels, which is what we see with kind of Andrew Tate.
Okay. So what would your message to people be now who are, globally millions, but presumably in the UK, hundreds of thousands, certainly tens of thousands of people who were where you were a couple of years ago, who are, I think, being spoon-fed a lot of things to essentially look in the mirror and hate what they see, right? And hate what, like you mentioned there, the sins of the father, which have nothing to do with them, really. What would your message be to those people?
That you're not guilty. You're not guilty for what's come before you, and no one is. No one is guilty for what's happened in generations before you. Generations before you are completely irrelevant to who you are now. I mean, we only have to look at the demographics of Occupy Wall Street to know that that's true. We know that it is not the case that, Western young men are benefiting from the fathers from all of our people before us. We're just as subjected, we're suffering.
Katie John Went said trans people deserve compassion.
What Sasha is describing his journey, and in that sense, it's entirely right. It's entirely personal, and they were saved from doing something that would have been wrong for them, absolutely. But I think one thing that's missing, as you called it, a toxic debate, is the compassion to the individual versus the kind of what you might call the toxic ideology side of it, where there's two sides of fences and people are literally throwing words and more at each other. But when you look at an individual person's journey, and if that person takes the time to come out with the right decision, then that is the best thing for an individual. And it's treating, say, trans people or people who think they may be trans as one homogenous, generalised group with a whole series of stereotypes. That doesn't help.
But Paula Diana told GB News there is no way to change biological sex, and it was time to repeal the ability to do so in law.
do repeal the Act, how do people legally change sex in this country?
They can't change sex legally because legal sex was an invention, was a political decision driven by a small group of Labour policymakers and radical trans-privilege activists. And mark my words, it's not rights that they're after. It's the privilege to crush our boundaries, to invade our spaces, to steal our sports awards, while humiliating us by parading their porn-driven sexual fetishes and forcing our children and us to participate in narcissistic games.
Okay, but not everybody who changes sex is engaging in fetishism or indeed wants to play rugby in a women-only team, do they? What about those people who genuinely, Paola, what about those people who genuinely feel that they've been born in the wrong body, want to become female if they're male or male if they're female, don't pose any threat to anybody else? What should happen to those people? Because I completely take your point on the GRA and I take your point on predatory trans people, but that's not all trans people, is it?
No, it's not, but the category doesn't even really exist because the ones who are not ill-intended and they don't have sexual fetishes are for the majority young people, usually autistic and gay, and we should help them because they're victims of this social contagion that, again, is driven by social media and porn online. The legal sex shouldn't exist. Sex has always been, for millennia, biological sex. We can't have laws that jeopardize 51% of the population and more because our children are the ones most in danger.